But before we get into that, I think Brandon has some stories to tell us about Ecuador.
Yes, yeah, you have quite a bit to tell us from what I understand, and I'm honestly really excited.
Well, I'm curious, do you guys want to hear about Peru or Ecuador? Peru would be where I did my own ayahuasca retreat as a participant, and Ecuador is where I volunteered and did a work exchange, and where I was kind of like, a part of the experience, but also more just there in the chaos of it for about a month and a half.
Well, wherever you want to start.
Okay, so when I was in Iquitos, it's this jungle-adjacent city that basically is like, if you look it up on Google Maps, it's smack dab right in the middle of the jungle, and it's only accessible by boat or by plane. And it's basically known as this like shamanic city. Ayahuasca is a really big part of the culture there. And I heard about this retreat from a friend in Canada, and he recommended I go check it out because I was looking for the Shipibo lineage, essentially knowing that they have a long-standing history with being ayahuasca shamans.
Yeah.
So I went there for a 2-week retreat. And
maybe you should explain what ayahuasca is, just in case anybody listening does not understand. So,
Gotcha. I think of it so much as like I feel like everybody knows what it is because it's becoming more mainstream, but for sure, if you don't know what ayahuasca is, it actually, the word, I believe it's Quechua, which is an indigenous tradition of somewhere in the Amazon, central Amazon. It means vine of the soul, and ayahuasca is this plant brew, so it's a psychedelic brew that it combines a leaf called the chacruna leaf, which is technically the Chacruna viridis plant, and that is combined with a root called the capi vine, sometimes referred to as Banisteriopsis capi. And these two plants, they were like discovered, I won't say at random, because like there was ways to which the Amazonian indigenous could identify these plants, and they didn't just do it trial and error style. Like I don't know how that would be possible, but they combined a root and a leaf, and it created this effect that basically would be something like 6 to 10 hours of visions. And then this tea is used in a more modern context to help, let's just say, Westerners or various different cultures heal from trauma or essentially reach insights about something that they've been trying to heal. And it's often it's very unpleasant. It's in the form of puking, sometimes shitting, and it's held in a ceremony for the whole night. So a lot of times people have some pretty unpleasant experiences to report after that.
Yeah, because I've never done ayahuasca myself, but I have done DMT, which comes from the same plant. And what would you say like the differences are between ayahuasca and DMT? I know that ayahuasca lasts a lot longer, and DMT is like maybe 10-15 minutes once you break through. Yeah. But beyond that, I guess, what are some differences you could bring up?
100%. Well, firstly, I should have mentioned the chacruna leaf that contains the DMT. And yeah, the type of DMT that's in ayahuasca is very different because the DMT that you smoke, it's typically referred to as either pure extract or NN-DMT. That DMT has been chemically essentially reduced to like a crystal, right? So you have to smoke it out of a pipe, and that's one of the versions. Let's just say we're referring to that DMT, NN-DMT. That shit's crazy. It's like it jumps you really deep, really fast. I've smoked that type of DMT at least two or three times, and I don't recommend doing it unless you're prepared, because it's kind of like you just do this thing as simple as just inhaling and holding your breath for like maybe 30 seconds, and you're blasted into a completely different dimension. Sometimes you meet aliens. Often you meet some kind of like entity that you could refer to as God.
I met like a giant moth thing, which like brought me over this landscape of I don't know. It was kind of like being at the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, but with a giant moth that was leading me around.
It's kind of kaleidoscopic, and it's super, super intense. I kind of remember it like you feel like you're dreaming in this space, but you can't exactly equate it to feeling like a dream. It all feels so real, and I kind of describe it, if you want my theory around it, is you're being shown reality. Like if this is all a matrix, if this is all simulation, it's kind of like you're stripping back all the layers of what's interrupting the real, and then DMT shows you that real, even just for like 10-15 minutes, and it's very overwhelming oftentimes, but it's also very beautiful, right? What you experience, what you see, it's bringing you closer to something that, you know, whether that's God, whether that's you know, the reality that we're kind of not able to access with our regular consciousness. You're accessing something bigger than you, and something, I would say, that is just realer.
Yeah, it's tapping into chemicals in your brain that, like, you honestly maybe don't even know are there, and then you, like, enter into this world, this dimension, whatever you want to call it, and, you know, it's a very, not exactly just a experience of getting super duper high, but it can also be very eye-opening, and it was, you know, for me, and I've heard more from people who've always taken it too, is that, like, it really just shows you a whole, or it makes you, not even just shows you, but it makes you feel like you're in this whole other universe, and like nothing that you've ever experienced is actually real, and you're just here. And it's a pretty it's a very intense, powerful drug. I would not recommend doing it unless you're adequately prepared, like you said.
Yeah, and just to get back to your question, comparing this experience of smoking a crystal, right? It's an extracted form of DMT, where it only lasts like 10 or 15 minutes, and then you have to make sense of that. Versus ayahuasca, there's a lot of preparation. You often have to go to a retreat. You're often working with a shaman. Actually, I would say in every case you should be working with a shaman, but not everyone does. But it's like you're working with this shaman, and there's something of a preparation process. And the ceremony lasts, again, something like 12 hours. The ayahuasca maybe doesn't last that long, but the whole process lasts 12 hours. And then after the fact, you talk about it. There's a lot of emphasis on integration, which is just like talking about what came up. So with DMT, ideally you have those same things in place, but oftentimes those same safeguards don't exist. Like, you can get DMT I won't say pretty much anywhere, but in Canada you could buy it at a store downtown.
Yep, you can. I just went into that store, like the right? I got some LSD from a store that you can actually buy it, and you can also go buy like peyote and coca leaves.
That's crazy
and,
for me because I'm
we're not trying to
living on
advocate
the
for that
whole
either,
other side of the country, and none of that is available on our side. So that's just wild to me.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, is that when I moved to Vancouver before, or in like 2014, I want to say, I think, that was actually before weed was legalized, so the concept of just going into a weed store was like pretty crazy. And then what happened is that weed got legalized, so all those stores turned into government stores, and then the weed people started dealing in other drugs like mushrooms, which are basically decriminalized everywhere. But there are specific stores that you can go into and buy these other substances like peyote, LSD, coca leaves, and, you know, not
which
that
I'm
overwhelming. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I haven't even done like half the drugs that are available just at store. And and, you know, again, it's not that I'm necessarily condoning drug use, but I would rather it be like this rather than having it go to drug dealers and, like, you know, making the world like so much more. I just don't believe in the war on drugs at all.
Well, there's a lot of different rabbit holes we could go down. Right off the bat, I just want to say, even ayahuasca is accessible. Unfortunately, in parts of Peru, it's actually, so it is fully legal in Peru, not in Canada, but it is fully legal in Peru. And sadly, you could buy ayahuasca pretty much anywhere, similar to the fact that you could buy DMT pretty much anywhere there. And I just want to say that as much as it's accessible, I would find it's really important for us to recognize that these are very, very, very powerful molecules. These are very, very powerful psychedelics, and, you know, it can have lasting impacts. Whether that's good or bad, that really depends on, like, the safeguards that are in place, the person's personal intention. I don't know if you guys have heard of set and setting, but there's a bit of a harm reduction perspective I like to take when we start to look at DMT especially, right?
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure DMT itself is legal in Canada, if I'm not mistaken, because it's just not that well known, and it is a natural drug. It comes from like
Yeah.
tree bark.
Yeah, actually, that's important to note. There's been a lot of controversy around how technically the leaf itself containing the DMT, where it's not legal, you could get in some shit if you're containing the leaf itself. But let's just say the cartridge, the vaporizer, stuff like that. I don't know if don't quote me on this, don't hold me to this, but I don't think it is illegal. But then when you mix it with the kapi vine and it becomes the ayahuasca brew, that is technically illegal, and you could get a sentence from carrying that on you. So
Okay.
yeah,
I mean, I highly doubt you will, given
the
like
specifics.
the amount of drug addicts that are around
Yeah.
Vancouver. But
yeah, as a personal user, maybe not, right? Yeah, that's fair.
but then again, like we said, we're not necessarily condoning. We're just putting the facts out there from what we've experienced. So
For education's sake, for understanding what ayahuasca is, and just to bring us back to that. So yeah, DMT, quick and fast, very accessible, but at the same time, maybe on some level normalized in Western culture, that you smoke DMT, you'll meet God, and it's kind of like I think they call it the businessman's psychedelic or something, because it's just so fast. You can do it in 15 minutes, and then you're sober. And then you compare that to, say, ayahuasca, where sometimes, at least in the tradition I experienced, there's what's called the dieta. So it's a lot of preparation. You prepare the body, you prepare the mind. Sometimes it requires you to travel, right, somewhere remote, especially if you go to the jungle. It's a huge expense. It's a huge commitment. So then DMT, in the extract version, it's no commitment. You can smoke it, and then you can go to lunch with your buddy. But
yeah, I
ayahuasca,
think
not
that's
the case.
what we did actually when I smoked it that one time. But yeah, but like it is this thing where it was very much a spiritual experience, and I mean, drugs are just a tool that you can use. Like, it's as long as it's not something you're relying on or addicted to, or you have an addictive personality or something like that. I mean, I would say you could just feel free to experiment and be safe about it. Make sure that you get it from a reputable source, and that you're
you can test DMT at a drug testing site downtown. That's actually probably like 20-minute drive from where you would pick up the DMT. So just test your drugs, folks, even if it's DMT.
Are you talking about get your drugs tested?
I used to work at Get Your Drugs
Oh,
Tested,
wow.
actually.
So did I. Well, not that part of it. I worked at the dispensary.
Okay.
That's how me and Brandon met, is that we worked
Oh,
at the dispensary together.
That's awesome.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now,
One day I'll get into crazy customer stories at the dispensary, because there was some fun stuff that happened.
Yeah.
But that'll be for a different podcast, I think.
So, one question I have is, I think of the three of us, I'm the only one who hasn't tried any actual hallucinogens. I've never done even LSD, mushrooms, anything like that. I've basically only done marijuana, cannabis, things like that, stuff to relax myself, because a lot of the issues I have are mostly anxiety based, and I have a lot of anxiety about trying out something like that. And you say things like being prepared. How would one even prepare for something that sounds so life-changing and over the top as something like this?
So, set and setting is a harm reduction philosophy that really refers to set being kind of like your overall intention, and if I'm remembering correctly, it's really just about your mindset and where you source the substance and stuff like that. It's preparing you, having the right set mindset. And then setting is really about the environment to which you're using the substance, really creating the safety even just within your body and within your internal experience. And then having a right guide if you feel like that's necessary. So it's kind of the idea that all psychedelics are unpredictable. On some level, you're kind of just like throwing the die and trusting a certain medicine, but you can do your due diligence. You can research a little bit. Like there's a great website called Arrowid where you can read about psychedelic reports, trip reports, and sometimes get a little bit of perspective. Don't bias yourself too much, but sometimes if it's a substance that you're taking that lasts for, let's just say, 12 hours, like LSD, it's helpful to know what's the common experience, what's the common trip kind of like what are some of the common experiences. And then I would say if you can get a buddy to just kind of hang out with you sober, not necessarily like a guide or a therapist, a trip sitter, exactly, because like you can pay to have an individual who's trained in psychedelic harm reduction kind of be your guide. But I would say even just having a buddy around who you trust, who you could essentially just kind of like who can check in with you and just keep your physical environment in a good kind of like balance, because like just having your basic human needs met, right, just drinking enough water, eating your meals, making sure you're in a safe place physically so that you're not hurting yourself unintentionally, and then maybe either a buddy who you can talk about stuff if you're kind of feeling emotionally vulnerable, because like there's a possibility something might come up, some intense emotion that maybe you've never sat with before, and just knowing that you don't have to have like a therapist with you, but maybe just a buddy who can at least be like, yeah, okay, you're gonna be okay, man, and maybe can distract you. Actually, there's some help. There is benefit just in having somebody who knows how to, I don't know, just create that safety for you, whatever that looks like for you, right?
Just have some sort of semblance of security during that time. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and maybe getting the drug tested too, right? Like knowing what you're dealing with, knowing if it's cut with something, and then maybe you look for a source where it isn't cut with something, and then you can have that certainty where you're like, okay, well, is this just going to go off the rails due to some sort of unpredictability? And so just trying to avoid unpredictable curveballs, really.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a very good advice, I would say. And I don't know if you said you haven't done mushrooms. I mean, that was kind of a starter one for me. I usually don't do mushrooms because they kind of fuck with my stomach, which is the same reason I don't drink that much. But, I would just say, also pace yourself. Make sure, that's the good thing about mushrooms is that you get them in like a bag and you can like take small intakes and you can just keep going if you don't feel anything. But yeah, that's kind of where I would recommend starting. I don't know if you agree, Brandon, but...
Start slow, and always try to maybe undershoot your dose. Once you've taken too much, you can't really do much about that, but if you undershoot a dose and you're like, I didn't quite get where I want to go, that's okay too, so you can ease your way into a more profound experience. And there's a lot of great YouTube content, so if you look up tips for taking mushrooms or something, right, there's a lot of dedicated content that specifically gets into like LSD or mushrooms, and they can walk you through all sorts of great stuff. I spent a long time just watching videos like that when I was in my, let's just call it my prime of taking psychedelics, and it helped me just feel comfortable with it, right? Like on some level that's part of the set, right? It's part of setting that mindset, getting into a good headspace beforehand, doing a little bit of research, just feeling comfortable with the experience. Because if you have an association that this is going to be fucking crazy, like, the anxiety in itself might actually be something that you need to overcome first before you get into that space, because that anxiety might be the point of entry.
Yeah, no, right? That's definitely my biggest roadblock to having not tried any of this stuff yet, is I already have this anxious mind, and thinking about doing it gives me anxiety. So it sort of feels like if I go through with it, would have to be when I'm in some sort of placid, calm state, which just doesn't happen very often for me, with the exception of smoking a little bit of pot or something like that. And it's something I've always wanted to try, because it really makes me think like, well, if I went through this experience and I was in the right headspace, could that change some things for me? Could that change how I feel day to day from an experience like that? Yeah,
but I mean, it's also the same thing as that. Even with like marijuana, you say that helps you with your anxiety. I know a lot of people that makes their anxiety way worse when they smoke weed or something. So, I mean, it's all about how your body and your mind kind of reacts to stuff like that. And Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's
and
just
I know I was that way when I first started smoking too. I remember the second time I ever smoked with you and our friend Braden. I was just walking around town, just scared that someone was going to get me.
yeah. That's a barrier of entry when I started smoking too. Is that I would get into like these paranoid states at times,
Well,
but
I feel like whereas it's a helpful like frame of reference to have marijuana, which by the way in high enough doses is similar to a psychedelic, like some of these edibles we had at the dispensary.
Wow.
100%, you're basically setting yourself up for a trip. But I would say that yeah, it's crazy, but I would say comparing THC in the regular dose that we ingest it just say to relax or to sleep, it's definitely not it's so different. It's so different than comparing it to psychedelics like, say, mushrooms or LSD. And I would almost say that comparing two substances side by side can be very, very, I won't say challenging, but it can misrepresent the molecule and the experience of that molecule as it is, because man, they just they operate differently in the brain. They activate different mechanisms within the body. So it's like saying even if you smoke a bunch of weed, it can be kind of similar in some ways. It's probably also very different. That's something to just note.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Just to bring us back a little bit to backtrack a little bit, the topic of addiction, I know we didn't really we brought it up in just ever so slightly, but I kind of wanted to introduce how I first heard about ayahuasca, because most people in Vancouver, they probably heard of Gabor Mate. He's a addictions researcher who spent, I think, 15 years, well, first he spent most of his life studying to become a doctor, and he went and worked at Vancouver General Hospital in the trauma ward, in one of the emergency wards, and then eventually he was getting so burned out, they said, hey, you got to try something else. And he's like, okay, I'll work in these addictions clinic downtown, that seems better. And I mean, realistically, that was probably one of the best decisions he ever made in his life, but it was actually due to burnout. So he started working in these addictions clinics. I think it was called Portland. It was an addictions clinic on the downtown east side. And after 15 years of working with, heroin addiction, the fentanyl crisis as it was unfolding, all sorts of different various drugs, crack and methamphetamines, he came across ayahuasca as essentially kind of like a last-ditch effort to help some of these problem users, people who are using drugs, to help reorganize their system, to help kind of clear something that was getting in the way of sobriety. And no, it's not like you drink ayahuasca and then wham bam you're sober, but that was one of the things that was kind of preached as one of the more effective tools for combating severe addiction, was bringing someone to an ayahuasca ceremony. Like Gabor Mate actually lost his medical license because he advocated so strongly for the use of ayahuasca, where in Canada it wasn't legal. So, they had to fight him on that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that's where I heard about it first, and then I got curious about it. This took me about 5 or 6 years of doing my own research, really garnering the courage to actually go and find a shaman myself, and then eventually landing in Peru. And regardless of how well researched your option is, there's always going to be like uncertainties. Like for me, I was doing 8 ceremonies, and it's kind of like you can't come out of that one without expecting it's gonna build up to something big. And I mean, I'd spent a long time doing psychedelics, and I'd done DMT a few times, but I'd never done ayahuasca, right? Like, this was my first experience drinking ayahuasca, was in this retreat where they start you off, let's just say slow, but progressively you build up to some pretty big, pretty challenging experiences. And I don't need to get into the explicit details, but I had some of the hardest moments in my life, which is crazy, because I thought I'd experienced a lot of my harder moments in my teen years, but no.
Yeah.
The hardest moments of my life was revisiting some of these things, some of the pain, some of the fear, some of the really, really terrifying things that surfaced. And it feels manageable while you're, let's just say, in the Maloka, but then there are points afterwards where I don't know, I'm still integrating it. It's just what I want to say. Like, you know, it's going to take me years to integrate drinking ayahuasca even once, but then like once you build up to larger doses, you just go deeper. You just get down to the more core stuff. And yeah.
Yeah, that's why like doing it in like a shaman circle or something like that is probably for the best, because it's with something like that, it's really good to set an intention with
That's right.
just what you do. Like, and that's the whole kind of issue with a lot of drug addiction in general, is that people are just doing it as an escape. And it's like, if you know, the intention is more so to look into yourself and find new things about the world and your reality and your perception and your consciousness. I mean, that to me is like, you know, people misuse something that can help them do that, because a lot of these like drugs were, you know, used in ancient circles and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure Jesus even smoked weed, and I'm not even joking. But
probably.
Yeah. So like, yeah, a lot of these religions and stuff, they're a lot of them were based out of you know, the drug, and that's probably why so many religions got interpreted, because people were misinterpreted because they were really fucking high, and while they were listening to this stuff. So
some of the most so there's a book called Supernatural, and gosh, I can't remember the author at this time, but it's all about the cave paintings in parts of France, in this underwater underground cave, where essentially some of the first cave paintings were apparently the result, they theorize were the result of shamans or regular folks, probably shamans though, drinking psychedelics, which they presumed to be similar to ayahuasca. And it changed something in their brains, where they were able to start thinking in terms of symbols. So basically they were theorizing at a certain point up until a certain generation. They didn't need to. Everything was oral history. There was no need to put things into some sort of symbolic representation. But the theory is as these psychedelics changed their brains, as they started to change the way they thought about the world, they would start to feel like, hey, I can reconstruct things in terms of a cave painting, and I can represent something symbolically. And obviously the impact that's had on the world is tremendous. So yeah, just trying to show you the degree to which these compounds have influenced humankind and the way we think historically. It just it's profound. It's profound how much influence it's had.
absolutely. And I mean, I think that's still happening to this day, because you bring up cave drawings, but even like a cartoon can have the same sort of implications. I mean, you know, just as a random example, like South Park or something like that, it's just like on the surface, it's just the most crass, like juvenile thing ever, but beneath the surface, it's like the smartest thing ever. So, I mean, like so much of like how art and, you know, all this stuff plays into history, and, you know, even these ceremonial circles and stuff like that. And, you know, so much of the world today is moving more towards like technology and stuff like that. But I mean, we gotta remember our spiritual roots and what it actually means to be human, because if we don't, it's, you know, taking us into this whole other, you know. Anyway, I feel like I'm getting a little bit preachy and a little bit like fucking.
I appreciate what you just said around like our getting in touch with our spiritual roots and remembering what it means to be human. That's probably like one of the underlying purposes for going to the jungle and sitting with these shamans and drinking this medicine that just really like changes everything. It's like I did feel for most of my time studying psychology and even studying counseling, it's hard not to get on some level disconnected from your spiritual nature. I mean, even when you take psychedelics and you get like a taste of it, it felt to me like I wasn't going deep enough, and there was something in the body that was still kind of holding on. It could be the ego, it could just be like I wasn't really truly surrendering. Like there's a big concept that comes up a lot in the spiritual psychedelic community. It's just like you have to surrender, you have to be able to let go, you have to let your mind basically just completely die. And that is a very, very, very challenging thing to do in practice. In theory, it's like, oh, so I just like let my mind have less control over me, but then it's like try doing that. Try even meditating. For the most part, it's a very challenging thing to actually do.
Yeah, it's 100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, but Yeah,
but it can be facilitated by some of these
Absolutely.
experiences. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like this is all pertinent to the movie we're getting to, but before we get to that, yeah, so did you want to tell us, I guess we talked about just the experience
Peru
around
mostly.
this stuff like that, but I mean, was there anything else you wanted to get into in terms of
Yeah,
like
any
Peru
sort of
or
stories or
Ecuador?
anything like that?
Stories. Yeah. Well, Peru, I think was mostly introspective because I spent 2 weeks on a retreat, not doing nothing necessarily, but we were encouraged just to sit in the Maloka or sit in our tombos, which are basically just like a little
Okay.
bare bones room, and we're really encouraged to do much. Now in Ecuador, this is where there would be a lot more stuff that actually happened because I was basically facilitating, which is kind of like the role of where you're supporting guests during ceremonies, just kind of like getting toilet paper, getting buckets, changing out puke bucket and stuff, but like you're also talking with them in between ceremonies, and I was doing that for a month solid, so that each retreat was 2 weeks long, and people would fly from all over the world to attend these retreats, and some of them would stay for 7 days, some of them would stay for 12 days, but it was basically kind of just like, 20 to 30 folks, probably more than that, probably close, something like 50 folks' first ayahuasca journeys. I was just kind of there, and I'm like, I just did my 8 ceremonies a month ago, and I'm here just kind of like, oh boy, here we go. and I mean, the experience of the ceremony is very, very beautiful to witness. It's basically kind of like you see this ceremony happen, and it's really beautiful. There's lots of music. It's around a fire. It's a lot of beautiful community and safety. But I would say many people, the first ceremony, it doesn't seem to go as planned. Like, there's a lot of physical releases. So, like, something I wanted to mention earlier is the way the indigenous Amazonian traditions used ayahuasca before the West kind of came in and got curious. It was basically a physical release, right? It was a purgative. It was very much just about releasing all the crap in the body, getting rid of all that. And many Westerners, they have this idea about, finding God, or like searching for enlightenment, or it's about healing trauma, and which are, by the way, incredibly valuable and important quests, right? Those are inquiries that I would recommend anyone goes into. However, from the indigenous lens, it's kind of like you drink this tea, you shit or you puke, and that's the medicine. That's the purge.
Yeah.
That's la purga. That's in Spanish. It's getting rid of the toxins and the dark energy sometimes. So going there and seeing so many people like super optimistic, super excited, just stoked to be in Ecuador, right? And then they get there and they do their first ceremony and they're like, what the fuck was that? Like, I have never been in so much pain and puked, and it's just, it seems to be very unpleasant. And then I guess for what I was trying to say is the difference between the folks that take away kind of like a level of optimism from that, like there's almost like a reframing of, wow, I got a lot of stuff out of my body. I cleaned real good. Like, you're kind of cleaning out the pipes in a way. And then some folks, they're like, they did kind of compared it to, hey, is this going to be kind of like a high dose of mushrooms? Is it going to be like, am I going to see like a bunch of fractals? Am I going to see a bunch of like animals and gods? And then they just like puke or shit for 5 to 12 hours. They get really disappointed, and they feel like, maybe they didn't quite get what they were looking for. But I would say those who have an open mind and the flexibility to really be with the experience as it unfolds, they take away a tremendous amount. And it's about that reframe. What's going on here? Not trying to make sense of and interpret and figure it out, I think was something that a lot of people, especially from the West, try to do. Is like, they try to figure out what's going on in an ayahuasca ceremony.
Exactly.
Well, good luck with that.
It's sort of you get what you get when you give, like what you put in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like if you're the type of person who has an open mind anyway, and you're going into something like that, I mean, you'll probably be able to get a whole lot more experience out of it than someone who's just like, ooh, I want to get really high. This is a drink that'll help me do that.
Exactly. And there's no, I don't think there's any shame in wanting that, but like if you're going in doing this sort of really important and like it's like a big ceremony, and you're expecting to go into it and just get that. You really need to open your mind to the other things that you can get from it.
Yeah, because you have to say, like you said, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but you got to know what you're putting into your body, and this is not the type of thing for that. So,
well, it's cleaning.
Yeah,
it's cleaning. However, the body knows it needs to it essentially triggers something in the body that just needs to go, right? And whether that's emotional and psychological or mental, or whether that's physical, it's kind of like, well, what have you been holding on to for your whole life? What have you been not cleaning and not healing, and maybe on some level suppressing? And this is where I love when the deeper you go with ayahuasca, the more you realize that you can't hide anything from a plant. Like, you can't, and it's terrifying, but it's also very liberating, because it's not like it's sitting there trying to bitch smack you through this process. It feels like it's they describe it as the grandmother, because the grandmother, she's holding you with love, she's holding you with gentleness, she cares about your well-being, and she's that safety, but she'll also isn't afraid to kind of bat you on the head when you feel like when she notices you're doing something really stupid. So it's that balance of that loving yet kind of authoritative relationship that I would say ayahuasca conveys so beautifully. And it's hard not to take something away from it. I just want to validate, though, I get it when people set expectations and really have a lot of invested in the experience, and they go there and it didn't meet some kind of expectation, and they have to unpack that happens too, and it can be very disappointing. So just allowing people to feel those feelings as well, and recognize that sometimes that's a part of the experience, is talking about how you felt as the result of having expectations and those not being met.
Yeah,
so.
Well, expect the unexpected. That's a good way of putting it. So.
Or just, I also just wanted to say, and maybe this is just kind of like a word to the wise, is some of these ceremonies, they'll combine what's called repe, which is a tobacco snuff. And whereas in many cases, I would say repe is something that helps with the ceremony, there is a 1 in 20 to 30 person reaction where you don't realize that you're addicted to tobacco, allergic to tobacco. So I guess just a word to the wise, kind of like a precaution, is if you are going to an ayahuasca ceremony, maybe just be aware if they use tobacco as part of the tradition, because sometimes they use it as a snuff, sometimes they use it as a liquid, they turn into a liquid and you drink it. And if you haven't ever used tobacco in your entire life, just maybe do some research around whether you are allergic to it, because you might have a very challenging experience.
No, that sounds physically, like a bad time.
Right? Yeah. It's awful. Like, some folks, they don't even drink the ayahuasca because somehow their body just can't process the tobacco, and they're incapacitated, and sometimes their body does all sorts of things. And I would say, maybe in ancient times, let's just say like 200 years ago or something, that would have been a part of the ceremony, where it's kind of like, hey, tobacco's teaching you that maybe it's not time to drink ayahuasca. And I don't want to interrupt the indigenous wisdom that might be unfolding, but I would say, since we have access to tobacco in so many different contexts, if there's any way that you can, without experimenting and then getting addicted to tobacco itself, just having some ability to try it out and see how your body reacts beforehand, so that you're not going into a ceremony with absolutely no understanding of how you're going to react to this plant. Do you guys have any questions about shamanism in general? Because that was one of the reasons I went to Ecuador, primarily, was to just have exposure to different styles of shamanism, different styles of ceremony, because there's hundreds of different traditions, there's hundreds of different ways to which ayahuasca is poured, or the ceremonies that are created around it vary quite a bit. So I don't know if that's something you guys are curious of.
Yeah, maybe. I would consider definitely going to a shaman myself, because I've always been kind of interested in a guided experience like that. I don't know for ayahuasca or if it would be for something else. I'm sure that there are a lot in BC, that I could probably scout out. I don't know if you know any personally, but yeah, I guess one question is like, don't they have like sleeping pills there for anybody who wants to dip out of the experience? Because I remember I had a friend who saw a shaman in Tokyo, and they were doing ayahuasca, and a lot of people were getting like sick, and they just wanted to opt out of this experience by taking a sleeping pill. So was that also an option when they were there?
I don't think so. I definitely know what you're talking about, though. They use this as a protocol in psychedelic therapy. They'll have benzos, benzodiazepines.
Okay.
Yeah, they did not have that kind of thing, from my understanding. Maybe they did, and I just wasn't familiar. I would say the shamans in South America, at least where I was in Ecuador, I can't imagine they would want to kind of like create some degree of shutting down the experience. Like, they definitely had protocols, don't get me wrong. When someone's freaking the fuck out, and it happens, it does, it can trigger all sorts of really challenging traumatic experiences that sometimes just need to be released somatically. So like someone's literally convulsing or screaming, it happens. Like, these are things that are not common, but they do occur, and they'll take them aside, and they have like a little care bed, and they'll sit the person down, and they'll have someone sitting with them, at least one or two people at all times. Sometimes the shaman will come over and do a little bit additional what's called limpia, so cleaning. Sometimes they blow certain perfumes onto them, or they'll sometimes just like burn additional incense or sacred tobacco to help the person. Essentially, they view it as there's like a dark spirit attacking them, right? It's kind of like they're under attack, and in a way, they're just, all right, well, let's just get this person into a space where they can get cleaned of that, or the shaman can give them more individual attention, and they can pray for them and help them get to a place of where they're balanced again. And those types of protocols, which are applied, I've seen happen at least 4 or 5 times. Those types of protocols seem to be more of the traditional route, versus in the West, psychedelic therapy often it's with psychologists or researchers, and they're going to have access to benzos, and they're probably going to have no real no problem with giving somebody that to help shut down the experience. Maybe that's in some way helping, let's just say, not allow the experience to become more traumatizing. But I would argue that maybe that's something the person needs to go through, and not to unnecessarily shut it down unless they are of physical harm to self or other. That's a different story. But in many cases, maybe that person just needs to have a temper tantrum, and as long as they're not like actually physically getting in altercations, they're creating safety for that space. Right? They're creating a permission for a person to feel into that anger, feel into that rage, feel into that fear. So
that's really interesting.
It's ideal to have that in some cases. Exactly. That's all I'll say.
That's really interesting to sort of, because you think of from a very base level, when you think of something that's like almost like a therapeutic spiritual experience like this, you expect the emotions to be prioritized, being like care and comfort and things like that. But from this description, there's some really visceral, I guess what you would consider uncomfortable emotions that you need to go through, and it's all a part of the experience. Yeah,
you need to go feel through. Or there's a quote. It's something like you need to go through it. I can't remember. It's something along the lines. You need to feel those feelings as they come up. Like, you really do. You really need to allow those experiences to be continued. Yeah. And not to get too deep into this, but that's kind of how complex trauma works, is there's often an experience that was cut off. You weren't able to fully feel what you needed to feel, and then there's a kind of an inconsistency in your body in terms of like, it almost doesn't know how to deal with it, so it stores it. It kind of just gets stuck, right? These emotions get stuck, sometimes in the organs, sometimes in the tissue. It's often, it gets stuck in the body, and that's where ayahuasca, it is such a somatic experience, because it's allowing this stuff to come up in a way that typically the mind won't allow to happen, right? You don't want to feel all the pain that you've bottled up your entire life. There's no way the ego would see that as being ideal. So the ayahuasca has some sort of way, who knows how exactly, but it kind of bypasses that natural response to suppress.
Yeah, because we're all kind of taught to be, or well, society anyway teaches us to not really experience anger or sadness or anything. It's like, but actually experiencing it is like how you process it. I mean, there's obviously anger and sadness that can be unprocessed or processed in a very horrible way, like murderers or whatever, rapists, like anything like that. But that's the way that you don't get to that point is by processing it in a healthy way. And it's just like, you don't want to be bottling Satan, as Game Dude would say.
And so I remember the quote. It's the way out. The way out is through. That's the quote. It's referring to how like you need to feel it to get through it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you're speaking to, at least in part, is the shadow. And if you haven't heard of the Jungian shadow, it's this idea of what you're not. Most of what we experience, most of where our trauma is manifest, it's unconscious, and it shows up in all these different forms. Let's just say I refer to them as parts, but anyway, let's just say murderers and rapists and pedophiles, all of these people that on some level at some point in their life were just humans with normal human experiences, but then they experience deep severe abuse, trauma, something that completely distorted their experience of reality, and then the inability to process what they went through, it becomes this unconscious underlying shadow experience, and then that is where the let's just say these really unexplainable psychotic tendencies come from. Is there's something there that they don't know how to express, and maybe on some level just couldn't receive love around. Anyway, this is a bit complicated, but like there's a certain point where they likely felt disconnected from, let's just say, connection to their caregivers or connections to other human beings, and then the result of that disconnect created beliefs. They created very strong, very I'd say unhealthy beliefs, but they've created very strong beliefs about this is how the world is, and then that gets internalized, and then as they get older, expressed in ways that they probably don't have control over consciously. So that's my 2 cents. I know that's a very controversial topic, but that's kind of the theory in terms of how the shadow operates below the surface, and you don't have control over it unless you're able to feel these things and process that trauma and heal it, really.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, like, especially in like the online space, and which is why I'm glad you're kind of considering going into that with a podcast and all that stuff. It's like so much toxicity exists online, and like, I mean, I kind of even make a living off of talking about a lot of it with like all the YouTube drama stuff that I've covered. But at the end of the day, like, I don't wish anything bad on anybody. Like, I hope everybody finds their like path in life and they don't get hurt or anything. Everybody should just process. Well, I don't want to say should, because everybody can just do things in their own way. I'm not like any sort of authority on the subject, but I find it a lot healthier to have these discourses and put it out there. So sometimes